Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be taking my usual look at yesterday's Prime Minister's questions. As seems to be commonplace right now, fireworks were expected and delivered due to the highly chaotic nature of the political situation right now. In response, Johnson's increasingly tame defence could only point out that Keir Starmer was a lawyer, as if this was an accusation, and that Ian Blackford has a bit of a waistline, as if this was a characteristic making him a less suitable leader than an incompetent liar. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the way I go over these can vary from time to time. Sometimes it's a blow-by-blow account, sometimes it's more general. I'm going to start off by saying here that the way I'm going to talk about PMQs, which will go on for a little bit, is going to be in general terms this time. We're in political purgatory right now. We're waiting for something to happen. I saw it suggested that for Boris Johnson's part, he was basically rehearsing his lines for when he has to defend himself to his MPs in a confidence vote. Also, that Starmer was keeping his big artillery for when the Grey report lands. Both of those views occurred to me as I was watching it. This was an odd PMQs. It reminded me of the early days of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I sometimes come up with odd links. Before he became Mr. Universe, I seem to remember a documentary where he was asked, whilst carrying out his grueling exercises, why he was smiling. Others were grimacing as they pushed themselves through their limits, through the strain of muscle building. He replied that he was smiling because every time he did these, he was getting closer to his goal. He was focused on his goal. And it can be the same with the cut and thrust of PMQs. Every time an opposition leader lands a serious blow on the government, they are getting closer to their goal of replacing them. So people who want that to happen cheer, and I often do as well. But this week was different. I don't believe that Boris Johnson is going to be fighting the next general election. As such, I can't tell which blows are really landing. All of them are hitting Boris Johnson. He's got no defence anymore. But some of Starmer's hits will hurt the Conservatives, even once Johnson's gone. Some will have only hurt Johnson. When he's gone, some of those blows will ultimately not have mattered. They have to be landed now, but ultimately they won't have mattered. But I don't yet know which is which, because that is down to what the public think of the Conservatives once they eventually kick Johnson out of the airlock. And we do not know when that's going to be. Besides, we should be seeing more questions on what the government are doing to help the people of this country better their lives. How are we promoting ourselves abroad while we're at it? That's normal politics. Not asking why the Prime Minister is still the Prime Minister after, at the very least, at the minimum, allowing others, if not himself, to break his own laws so freely. In a normal political state, a Prime Minister is found to have done this, they would immediately resign. It wouldn't even have to be that they personally were implicated in the wrongdoing. They will have presided over it, shown poor judgment and leadership, they would resign. There was a time when a pistol would have been involved. Not that I want that, but we cannot consider ourselves to be a functioning state while we allow such a dysfunctional Prime Minister to continue in office. And the scandals won't stop coming until he starts going. I said this yesterday. Even if he is made to walk the plank this week, let us say that he was allowed to continue for so long is itself scandalous. And that we are in serious doubt as to whether or not Johnson will go speaks of the rot at the heart of our country. The fact that it's even a question. But anyway, speaking of questions, there were questions. It was Prime Minister's questions. There were questions. I'll confine myself to a brief summary, as I say, of the now obvious points that nonetheless have to be made. Both Starmer and Blackford raised the fact that now the Prime Minister is under criminal investigation. This was the new thing. This is an escalation on last week when Johnson had to admit that the parties were taking place, but there was still no action from the police. So people trying to support him were still being able to say it's not met the threshold required for a police investigation. Well, now it has. So now it's much more serious. The heart of government is now under criminal investigation. Another situation that would mean any minister having to resign, much less the Prime Minister. Boris Johnson attempted to deflect the questions in one of two ways. The first was in trying to announce government policies. And this is where it links into the idea that what he's trying to do is rehearse his defence to his own MPs, why they should keep him on. You know, I mean, for example, when Starmer asked if Johnson thinks that the ministerial code applies to him, Johnson said yes. He actually answered the question. Well done, thanks. But then he started talking about a back-to-work scheme that the government were launching. Okay, not really related, is it, though? Now, I could point out that the scheme, just like all the others, won't actually deliver stated results, and that Boris Johnson only ever talks about plans for the future, never actual results from the plans he had before. I mean, actually, he sometimes does talk about results, but only made up ones. You know, like fastest vaccine rollout in Europe when we're not even in the top 15. Or the first to start vaccinating when we weren't. Or that our economy is doing well when it's actually doing very badly compared to the rest of the G7. No actual results that are objectively true and would have to be acknowledged regardless of political leaning. But the point is that this is Boris Johnson trying to make out that opposition leaders are focusing on trivial issues whilst he is getting on with running the country. An obvious tactic, definitely one I would advise him if I was his advisor, but his problem is that Starmer is not asking about Johnson's untenable position as Prime Minister for jolly japes, but because it is a massive source of public interest. And it's not about wine or cake or cheese or suitcases. It's about whether the people who make our laws abide by them. And while we're on the subject, this nonsense about it being trivial. If these matters were trivial, why were they outlawed? You don't outlaw trivial things, do you? If something's trivial, why would you go to the effort of outlawing it? The fact that these activities were made illegal is because they were not at all trivial. But anyway, Starmer could have been hammering the cost of living again with any number of lines of attack. You know, the tax rises, energy costs, fuel costs, cost of food. Could be the emerging news that Johnson lied about prioritising animals over people during the evacuation of Kabul. We now have the smoking gun proof of that one. Or the corrupt funding regarding his palatial Downing Street flat. Or the £1 billion that he's paying to private healthcare providers for nothing at all. For doing nothing. Just being on standby. Still haven't talked about that one, keep getting overtaken. Or the billions of pounds of fraud that the Treasury is writing off. There has been an update on that. Rishi Sunak is now saying he's not writing it off and he's actually going to chase it up after all. We will see. But they were doing up until yesterday. And at the same time as writing off £4 and a bit billion, nicking £20 a week from the lowest paid workers in the country. Or, as I say, he could push the largest tax burden in generations from this government. There's so many lines of attack that Johnson could be hit with right now. Johnson even tried foolishly to brand Starmer as Captain Hindsight again. Starmer was ready. He leapt up. As soon as I saw him leap up, I thought, hey, he's ready for it. He was waiting for this. It's never a good sign as the Prime Minister when the leader of the opposition absolutely leaps up. Starmer said, this is the guy who in hindsight said that it was a party. Ridiculing the fact that Johnson's defence last week, because it keeps changing, you have to keep up, his defence last week, that he didn't recognise the party that he was at was a party. Didn't think he was at the party. He had to admit that he was at the party. He didn't realise it was a party, apparently. And this is what I mean. So Johnson's saying, in hindsight, yes, I seem to have been at a party. Johnson's just got no defence anymore. There's no punches that he can now throw that have any hope of landing. They just rebound. I saw someone say, and it's absolutely crucial, and I fully support this view. Someone said, I don't care who you support politically. Listening to PMQs at the moment is fundamentally depressing. It is, of course it is. Boris Johnson said Starmer was a lawyer, not a leader. Later on, a Labour MP said he'd rather be led by a lawyer than a liar. He was asked to withdraw the remark, of course. You're not allowed to call another MP a liar. But the idea that being a lawyer somehow makes you less fit to lead than being a liar, sacked twice for lying, once as a journalist, again as a government minister. How is that supposed to convince the public? Also, bear in mind that Johnson's current defence is that these Downing Street parties were going on without his approval. It's actually his defence that his leadership is so poor that he cannot even prevent parties in his own department when he is in attendance, much less expect appropriate behaviour from his staff when he's out of the building. When Ian Blackford, leader of the SNP, pushed the same issue of Johnson now being under police investigation, Johnson's response was to try and fat shame him. Yeah, you seem to have eaten an awful lot of cake yourself there. That's all he's got now, trying to make himself look big by saying Starmer's a lawyer and Blackford's packing a few extra pounds. That's what he's got. That's what we're down to now. Of course, listening to PMQs now is fundamentally depressing. It's depressing for everyone. It's depressing for Conservative supporters because they are being forced into either publicly supporting a criminal liar who has presided over the worst COVID death toll in Europe and the worst economic performance in the G7, despite the spin he's trying to put on it. If you're paying attention, you know that. Or your other choice is just keep quiet. It's depressing for them. There will be decent, honourable Conservatives about whom the worst I could say is that their political ideas are, in my opinion, fundamentally wrong. They will not be enjoying this spectacle one little bit. It's depressing for Labour supporters like myself. See, we want to get on with the job of tackling the issues that should be addressed, that the country urgently needs addressing. The cost of living, falling real-term incomes, undermining the NHS, undermining the court system, undermining the police, undermining education, the out-of-control rate of COVID infection, the humiliation we are suffering in terms of how the world now sees the UK, the risk, the still real risk of political instability in Northern Ireland while we continue to threaten the Northern Ireland Protocol. This is what we should be talking about, but we can't because we have a corrupt and incompetent Prime Minister who has been proven beyond any reasonable doubt to be corrupt and incompetent. And he is not being removed by those who have a duty to do so. It's depressing. It's depressing for supporters of other political parties as well. It's not just Labour. Yes, Johnson is a political asset in many ways for the SNP, just like Labour, just like any other, or most other opposition parties. If Johnson was to be kept in place for the next general election, it would be jackpot time for everyone that wasn't a Conservative. But the good MPs in all parties, and I mean all parties, will want to use their role to bring improvements to the lives of the people. They may disagree about the best way to do this, but they want to pursue it within the confines of their political outlook. But they can't. Johnson makes it impossible. How can you talk about long-term government plans for the NHS, for levelling up, for the economy, for education, for law and order, for foreign affairs, when they don't have one? And even if they did, how could you seriously talk about any long-term government plans when we do not know from one day, literally from one day to the next, how long this government will even last? For all we know, Johnson may have resigned by the weekend, or he could still be in place in 6 months' time. It is an insane level of uncertainty and chaos to be allowing at the heart of government during a time of massive economic upheaval caused by COVID and Brexit. The Conservatives need to decide, do they stick or twist with him? Because it's insane right now. Got huge pressures to our systems of healthcare and education. Serious threat to peace in Europe, which cannot be overstated. And to counter these issues, many of which are self-inflicted, we have a cabinet of ministers who are chosen for their blind allegiance to Boris Johnson rather than any level of intelligence or wisdom. PMQs is fundamentally depressing because it isn't good for any significant section of our society. You know, there are supposed to be winners and losers in politics. It's unfortunate. It is unfortunate that we can't all get on, but that's how we are as a species. We're very tribal. But this is just universally bad for everyone that is not both a half-wit and a jackass. Nobody with any honour and intelligence can possibly like what they see in PMQs these days. My serious wish that it need not be like this again next week. But my hopes are not high. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.